Sketch the graph of the function f of x equals the square root of 4 minus x by plotting points. Plotting points to graph a function is pretty straightforward. However, sometimes the function does not easily lend itself to lots of different inputs. Specifically, the square root function is like that. The reason that is because not a lot of numbers are easy to take the square root of. And so we're going to be pretty strategic about how we pick numbers to plug in to this function. What we want to decide is what numbers are going to be easy to get underneath the square root, and then pick the x values that will give those to us. So, for example, the square root of 4 is pretty easy to get. And so that would result by plugging in an x equals 0. So I know if I plug in 0 for my x value, then f of 0, that's the square root of 4 minus 0, which is just the square root of 4, or 2. And that's nice and easy. But plugging in, say, 1 would not be very nice, because then I'd have the square root of 3, and who knows what the square root of 3 is. You know, it's some decimal number, and it's probably not super obvious. So if you don't have a calculator readily on hand, then it could be hard to do those. So we're going to just go through and pick numbers that are nice and easy to plug in. So 0 worked nicely. The square root of 1 is pretty easy, so that comes from plugging in x equals 3. Okay, so plug in 3, you get f of 3 is the square root of 4 minus 3, which is just 1. The square root of 0 is also easy to get, and so that would be x equals 4. So we're going to plug in 4. F of 4, and that's the square root of 4 minus 4, which is 0. Now notice, if I go bigger than 4, I'm going to have a negative under the square root, and that's not allowed. So I can't go any further, so we can actually go in the opposite direction now. We can go into some negative numbers. And just thinking it through, if I plug it in, say, a negative 1 here, I'd have the square root of 5. I don't want that. The next number that's easy to take the square root of is going to be 9. And so that would be x equals a negative 5. Negative 5. So f of negative 5 is the square root of 4 minus negative 5. And that's the square root of 9, which is 3. Now, at this point, I'm going to stop plugging numbers in, because our numbers that we're going to plug in are going to get further and further apart. And I think the points I have here are going to be pretty easy to go ahead and plot and get the shape of this graph. So let's go ahead and start plugging things in, or start plotting things. I need to pick the scale on my axes. And so I see that the smallest number I plugged in for x is a negative 5. So I need to be able to get to negative 5. So negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was the furthest I plugged in on the left, and then to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is the highest I plugged in there. And my y values, I just am going from 0 up to 3. And so I can kind of stretch this out a little bit if I want. 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then plug our points, or plot our points. So our first point is 0, 2 that we found. So that's right there. And then we had 3, 1, and that's going to be right here. And then we had 4, 0, that's right there. And I know that my graph stops there. I know that my x values can't be bigger than 4. And then at negative 5, I had a y value of 3, and that's right about there. And so now I can go ahead and draw a curve that's connecting these. Okay, and that gives me an idea of what the graph looks like.